Congratulations on the Summit for the Future. Congratulations on the Pact and the Global Digital Compact. Now what? And where do you see the biggest barriers right now? What's concerning you about how to implement it?
Well, look, I think even before we came to the summit, everybody was aware. They said, this is a really stupid time to have an important summit because nobody can agree on anything in the world, right? There's geopolitical division, there are tensions. We know all about the conflicts, which regrettably and naturally make the headlines every day. You know, is this place, are these 193 member states capable of coming together and acting in concert? And I don't have the answer to that question. But I have seen in the last days a very clearly stated commitment to make that effort. Member states matter enormously, but I want to say as well that other stakeholders matter enormously as well. Mm-hmm. In the field of technology, we have to work with the private sector. We have to work with the people who are producing these extraordinary and exciting transformations. We have to work with activists and civil society. We have to work not for young people, but with young people as well. So it's a big story. Everybody's involved.
And I wanted to ask you about that. So without a doubt, over the past few years, as we've gone through these kind of converging crises, the multi-stakeholder approach seems to have emerged as preferable. But I wanted to say, not just the future of dealing with these crises, but the future of the UN itself was a topic that seemed to be on the table here, and inclusion. This notion of not about me, without me, and how to bring the global majority more to the table, young people to the table. We were talking backstage, actually, and I was saying, look, it's hard to be that inclusive on the main stage of youth leaders when the average age of world leaders is 61, and by American standards, that's a spring chicken, right? So I guess, talk to me a bit about the importance of that kind of inclusion and how you see it shaping the future of the UN.
Well, you've given me that 61. I'm too old to be a world leader anyway, so that rules me out. But there's an interesting paradox here. Interesting paradox. I think everybody agrees, and that is the common discourse in this summit and everywhere else. We need to be inclusive. We need to bring in all of the stakeholders you've referred to. But when it really comes down to hard tax, hard decisions, member states say, it's just for us. This is a member state organization. Other voices are interesting, but they're not really to be there for anything other than support. If you look at the Pact for the Future we've just adopted, there are a whole series of commitments to broaden, if you like, the involvement of young people in particularly. Have a look at that chapter of the Pact that deals with young people and future generations. Actually making participation of young people, nationally and internationally, meaningful. The word is meaningful, because it's easy to invite young people to this building for half a day and they go home. If there's no consequence of that, their participation is not meaningful, it's tokenistic. And we got stuck at that level for far too long. So I think that we can move forward in terms of that involvement. There are also in the Pact references to partnerships with the technology industry, the scientific community, local and regional governments, academia, you name it, they're there.
Yeah, and
now we have to do it.
All of those are named in the HLab report on AI governance, of course. And I wanted to ask you, why do you feel the UN is uniquely either qualified or positioned to lead on global governance of AI?
Because, Tony, that's a very obvious answer to your question. It is the only place, name me one other place in the world, where every single country is at the table, 193 member states. There is nowhere else that this happens. And people very frequently, and I can understand it, they point to the shortcomings of the United Nations. Have we been successful in stopping wars and conflicts or preventing them around the world? Well, no. Have we delivered on the Sustainable Development Goals? Not yet. Have we stopped climate change in its tracks? No, we haven't. So it's easy to look at the deficiencies, and it's right to look at the deficiencies, because when you look at the deficiencies, you work out how to do better. I think there's an interesting and unfortunate circumstance. Some of the successes of the United Nations are invisible. What about that war that never happened because of UN mediation? What about that conflict that never occurred? It's invisible, but it's a success. Mm-hmm. So there's an asymmetry of the balance sheet of achievement and
Grain
failure.
deal in your, yeah.
The grain deal,
Yeah,
another
it's a
great example,
Yep.
of Black Sea grain deal. But, you know, for all its deficiencies, there is no substitute. This is where I fall into the cliches. If we didn't have it, we would have to invent it. But at the same time, let's not think that what was put in place in 1945 and has served very well the international community for decades is immutable, is perfect, cannot be improved. So the Pact for the future is also a pact for reform of the United Nations. And you will hear the Secretary General, you have heard him, you'll hear him again say that we need to reform our governance structures. The lightning rod here, of course, is the Security Council to make sure that those governance structures reflect the realities of today, not the realities of 1945. And I think a similar consideration might be applied to the international financial institutions. So it is an update as well for the United Nations governance structures to make it representative, effective, but also, and it's not the least, make it fair as well. Make it fair.
I want to ask you about Security Council reform now that you bring it up, because I mean, look, we've heard a lot about that over the past several weeks, and I know there are proposals on the table to add permanent seats for African nations, and you know, but how do you actually reform the Security Council when the 5 permanent members remain, and at least a couple of them really love that veto button?
If you're a rational human being, you would say the 5 permanent members would say no to reform, wouldn't you? Yeah. To protect their privileges, their self-interest. If you were listening, you heard President Biden say, yes, the United States strongly supports reform of the Security Council. And every other member of the permanent members have said the same thing. Now, you could say, well, that's easy because it's not going to happen. It's for nothing. it's gratuitous. But my impression is, and people who have been around the United Nations for very much longer than I have been, and Tony, the debate on Security Council has been around for a very long time.
Yes.
Actually detect today, and I'll leave others to judge whether you believe this, there is a momentum now for change. The language in the Pact is seen as the most meaningful language for reform. It's not the act of reform, but it's opening pathways to reform, the most important since 1963. And I was listening to a G20 meeting this morning. Speaker after speaker said, we are now on the way. This now has to happen. And there is a sort of a common logic to this, which is that the more the Security Council is seen to be out of phase with the realities of today and incapable of fulfilling its obligations to the international community, well, the head of steam for reform becomes ever greater until it becomes irresistible. That's the way change, I think, particularly difficult processes of change, actually happen. And we might just be moving towards that moment.
I want to ask you about the SDGs. So obviously this has been a really challenging few years, but to what extent, as they're falling short, do you think it was potentially overly ambitious in 2015 to take on so much in such a scoping way? Or do you think that, as I said, the past 3 or 4 years of hardship and converging crises were the issue?
Yeah, I'm going to take that in 2 ways. Firstly, let's not fall into the trap of saying, oh dear, we have failed to deliver. And we're not there yet, by the way. We are failing to deliver because of COVID, because of war in Ukraine, because of conflict in other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is, and the record bears this out, we were off track almost from the first day. We just didn't set off in the direction and at the pace that was required to deliver. Does that mean we made the mistake of over-ambition at the beginning? I don't believe that. I don't think that it is legitimate to say this was an unrealistic agenda and we overreached. The fact of the matter is, even if we don't get there, and look, member states are continually recommitting to delivering the 2030 agenda. Time is running short, but we're still working like hell for it. Mm-hmm. But if we don't get to all of those 17 goals 100%, let's not think that that simply represents failure. The success is how far along that road we came. when we would not otherwise even be on that road towards the SDGs. So I think it is not an era of over-ambition. We have to do better, we have fallen short, but this does not invalidate or remove the importance of this global endeavor that we've all been engaged in, which has value in itself. I treat the SDGs as a global public good. In a world divided, it's one of the few things that everybody seems to agree upon.
And finally, we're going to have a conversation next about education and skilling and the importance of technology. How do you view skilling and technology as a tool to help get there on the SDGs?
I see technology from two perspectives. Firstly, the pace of technological change, and it's accelerating all the time, means that skilling and reskilling becomes ever more important. It just puts more and more emphasis on the need for lifelong learning processes, which the world is very bad at. We don't know how to do it. So technology makes skills formation more important than ever. And at the same time, if we're smart enough, technology can be used as an extraordinarily powerful tool to deliver on skilling and education. So I see it as challenge and response at the same time.
Guy Ryder, thank you so much for doing this. It was great to have you.